I'm John Wilker, the organizer of 360 IDEV. I hope you enjoy this session recording, but first I wanted to mention one thing. We've served the community since 2009, and over the past few years we've had to take on debt in an effort to keep the conference alive. After several unforeseen challenges, not the least of which is a pandemic of indefinite duration, we've had to make the hard choice to end the conference as we're now facing over $100,000 in debt. As a result of requests from the community of how they can help, we've created a GoFundMe campaign. If you're inclined and able, please consider donating to help keep 360 IDEV going. The QR code after this will link you to the campaign. Thank you. Enjoy the recording.
All right, let's get started. I've got a little note here on my speaker notes to thank Chris and Nicole, and that was before I heard about this morning. And I really do want to shout them out because I've been doing conference talks for a little while, but this is my first one back since the pandemic. And I'd never been to 360 IDEV. I'd heard really amazing things about it, and all I can say is that everything I've heard is true and it's better. So thank you to all of you as well for making it such a wonderful experience. I've really enjoyed myself. I hope you all have as well. So if we can give a little round of applause to Chris and Nicole. And of course, everyone else that's made this happen. There's tons of people running around all the time doing things. So good, perfect. So what we'll be talking about today is it's a proper no-code talk. So bear with me. And it's actually some of the things that made me start my own business recently. I was an iOS developer for quite a while, so I'm not a full imposter here just yet, hopefully. But it's a lot of the things I'm going to cover today that led me to go out and branch off. And what I'm hoping to do with the work is, kind of turn it into a world where innovation can be effortlessly created by all the people that technology actually aims to serve and work for. And it's something that I would love to get all of us involved in, which is kind of the reason I'm doing this talk. I've reserved some time for Q&A. I don't know how many questions people have, but really it's just a dialogue. I really welcome your thoughts on this. It might be that you have questions about how to apply this at work, or if you're starting a newsletter or something or another like that. Be great to talk, but otherwise you can find me after as well. And with that said, let's get going. Because it all starts with an idea, right? And what I really find fascinating about ideas is that it starts just in one person's mind. Like, it's just a fleeting thought. And how can you make it spread? In the words of TED and TED Talks where they say, let's share ideas, how does that actually happen? Well, I can ask you, imagine a tall giraffe grazing in an East African safari park towering over the visitors. Can you take a second and actually imagine that in your minds? And chances are that hopefully what you had in mind isn't too far off from this picture. And why is that? Because I don't think many of us have actually been to East Africa. Maybe you have, which is awesome. It's a gorgeous place. It's partially where I'm from. But we could still picture that. And that's pretty amazing. Suddenly, all of us, right, are more or less thinking and picturing the same thing, which means that we're creating a shared understanding here and we're having a common experience. Now I can go to another example and say, imagine the one iOS error message that makes you want to pull your hair out. Take a second to imagine that one. Now for me, it's still a bad access error. This still haunts my nightmares. I have a feeling it doesn't show up as much anymore in Swift, although I understand it can still happen, but back in the day, this was a real nightmare to debug. Now, I don't know what you thought of, and I'd love to hear actually, come find me after, but chances are that we didn't all picture the same image this time around, right? And that's because whilst we have a shared understanding of iOS, we still have different experiences, and so the things we imagine can be different. Had I asked this question to another crowd, perhaps one that isn't familiar with iOS at all, they might have had no idea what to picture. Ooh, clicker jumped around, sorry about that. So, taking that a step further, right, I'm going to ask you to imagine one final thing. Imagine the various steps and paperwork and everything required to buy a house. I see a few people nodding who clearly have gone through this process and have suffered, probably, like I have. And if you haven't gone through that, you probably don't have much of a clue what to expect. What you're thinking of is based on what maybe other people have told you, like the couple of giggles in the room of like, it's a whole process, like you're in for a ride. But what that ride looks like, you might not quite know. But if you have gone through it, you may be remembering painstakingly all the things you had to learn, all the paperwork you had to pull together, and everything you had to do. And chances are still it's different because I'm based in the UK and maybe some of you are based in the US and some of you are in Canada and God knows where. So like everywhere it's different yet again. The thing about ideas is we can often only imagine what we know. I don't want to put a complete dampener on this because of course there's innovation. There are true visionaries out there who can imagine something that we haven't all seen yet, which is what's really cool about it. But the thing is that they are often also limited to how great they are at communicating those ideas. Because if you can't translate what's in your mind to other people, you can't make those ideas spread. And so I've promised you a talk on how to grow your impact, right? And you might be wanting to do that for various reasons. It could be just something you're looking to do at work. It could be something that you're interested in, starting a blog or a newsletter or something or another like that. It could be something you want to do in your personal life or in something in your hobbies. It's the kind of stuff that applies to a lot of things. How you do that, I'm sure there are many ways, but the one that I really like is one of the things I think we want to do is make it really easy for other people to tap into your brain and your knowledge. Now you might be wondering, well, I already blog and live stream and tweet and mentor and publish open source and do all the things because we are, at this conference, we love learning and we probably love sharing it with others too. What I'm talking about here, what just happened? Sorry, technology is not with me today. Here we go. There we go. What I'm talking about in this case is that we are a lot more than just the code that we write. When I see this room and I think of all the potential of the impact that we can have, all the knowledge that's gathered in this room, I get incredibly excited when I think about how we can share and spread that. Because we have so much knowledge, and often we only share a fraction of it. And I mean this in the context of the fact that we are, I think I'm just going to move to spacebar tapping, folks. We are people in an exponentially growing industry that, unfortunately for a lot of other people, is actually quite hard to grasp and hard to get into. And so if we make our knowledge accessible, really truly accessible, we have the opportunity to welcome everyone in this space. And I think that's pretty darn cool. In case you want a crash course of just how crazy our industry is, I pulled together some fun facts. Turns out we touch our phone over 2,500 times a day. And the asterisk there is because this was a stat in 2017. I don't even want to know what it is right now. And that averages out to about 3 times a minute, which means tapping, typing, scrolling, scrolling, some more scrolling, and all of that. So the things that we build are really being used by people at an extraordinary level. What are people doing with phones and the internet and everything else? Well, we're creating data. And close to 90% of that data has been produced in just the last 2 years. It is actually going like that. And half of today's technology comes actually from a lot of interesting things that we are all working on. Like there were talks about machine learning, there was talks about AR and VR and robotics, AI is being used. And so it's not just the technology that we perhaps grew up with or that we knew from many years ago. It's actually quite advanced and interesting stuff that's happening. All of this accumulating into an industry that by the end of this year is set to exceed 5.3 trillion USD. It's a big thing that we are part of, and it's not just us, because as of last year, close to 150 million tech startups are in this industry with us. We probably work for a couple of them. So with this explosive growth, we know, okay, great, the industry has been growing exponentially. But as I mentioned, access is still limited. And with that, I mean, for us, it's been probably easier than ever to spin up a server or create an app or pull together a website, if you remember kind of doing it the old way. And then at that point, other people were like, well, in my day, I was punching cards to get the computer to do something. But what does that mean for the everyday person? Because at the end of the day, everyone is using technology, and very many people actually know precious little about how it works, the things that they use every day, how that works. And if they are actually looking to go beyond that and they want to contribute, they want to take their skills and their knowledge and fuse it with technology and take it a step further, they might have even more trouble. For example, I work with a lot of non-tech female founders. And if that is your space, you might be familiar with the other stat that I'm about to share with you. If not, it might be a bit of a sobering fact. In the last year, in the US, obviously venture capital is being dished out, and female founders only received 2% of that, which is down from the shockingly high stat that it was the year before, which was 2.3%. All this to say, very little funding goes to, in this case, female founders. But of course, we have many different types of founders that have a lot to share. But again, look around you. We're all using technology. We're all relying on technology. So if we're not all building it, what kind of world are we hurling towards to with this incredibly exponential growth? For example, some of the things my clients are doing, reducing the burden of proof in domestic abuse cases and using technology to solve that problem. Another one of my clients is increasing education and certification for people who are incarcerated. Another one is allowing folks to get financial assistance in just under 2 minutes here in the US, because there's a lot of, from what I understand, bureaucracy in getting the right kind of forms and everything together if you're being evicted, if you need support with rent, and so on. I think that's pretty cool. So when I think of impact, I think, how can we use our skills and our knowledge to make technology more accessible for everyone? And why does that even matter? Now comes the part where you can really sit back and relax, because I'm going to deviate slightly. I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and I'm very interested to hear your takeaways from it. So number 1, where the developer happiness took center stage. Yes, pun intended. So this happened quite a couple of years ago. I want to say 2015 or so. And I met this person who was working on the first product. Basically, they chatted to Apple, they hired a developer, they got their very first MVP version of the app out onto the store. Now, this was a time before Swift, and at the time, there was this framework that had been doing the rounds. If you went to a lot of conferences, you went to especially local meetups, everyone was talking about it. And it was called Reactive Cocoa. With Reactive Cocoa, if you're curious, you could subscribe to events, and so you could update things quite easily because you would be, knowing what's going on in other pieces of the code, and so it was an architectural framework that quite a few people really enjoyed. Now, the founder knew nothing about this, obviously, right? They got someone, they built this first version of the app, it was out on the store, and I can't actually remember why they weren't working with that person anymore, but they were looking to hire new people to do the requisite updates to that first version of the app, because obviously you find your bugs, you find your issues, people start using it, and they give you feedback. So here she was, trying to find people, and she found 2 wonderful people that she could afford, and they had absolutely no idea how to work with that code base, because they happened to be 2 people who were not familiar with Reactive Cocoa. And so, yes, they could go and learn that, because as we all know, we're no stranger to changing technologies and changing architectures, but it cost them a lot of time, extra time, and in return, obviously, it cost her a lot of money that she was paying out of pocket because she was not VC-backed at the time. And so, what can you take away from this? Because we can debate whether or not Reactive Cocoa was the right approach to this, and I don't know the developer, and I don't know why they made that choice. And I'm not here to judge them. But what I hope to draw your attention to is we make important decisions, and there are consequences for other people when we do that. And so is that the right decision in the right context? And do we even know what that context is? Story number 2. The one where they, in my opinion, were hit with a blast from the past. This is a younger girl who I teach as part of a university entrepreneurship course. And she had gotten a friend of a friend to build her a platform. So we've moved on to web right now. This is not an app. And that wasn't going very well. It wasn't being finished after she waited a couple months. I think at this point it was 10, 12 months in. And she really wanted to put this platform out because she was doing the whole transactional piece over WhatsApp with all of her different users and so on. And she was like, oh, I really want this platform to be ready. So I think I'm going to cut ties with this developer who was, I think, doing it in their spare time, which makes sense, they're busy. I'm going to try and find someone else. So the developer handed over the code, which obviously she had no idea what to do with, because it's just some kind of zipped up package sitting there, and was told that it was built using PHP. Now, again, not to diss PHP, just like reactive Cocoa is, it's got its pros and cons. But if I were building a web platform in 2019, I may not use PHP. And what she found herself having to face now is the fact that she, again, could barely find anyone to take what she'd already invested in and take it another step forward, because it was extremely difficult to find a PHP developer. The ones that were out there were extremely senior, extremely skilled, and actually working on very large systems that, due to nature and due to legacy code, were still running PHP. But she couldn't easily get someone that she could afford that was able to take that project. So she had to start from scratch. Literally started from scratch. Again, we can debate the merits of technical choices, and I was not that developer, and I do not know what they were familiar with. But was that the right choice in the context? Maybe not. And do we actually realize that when we pick tech stacks, especially at these very early fragile stages, just the position that we put other people in? I'll talk about the reverse as well, because there is obviously a responsibility with the founder and with other people too, but we'll bookmark that as we go on to the final story, which I might get a bit of crap for, which is the one where shortcuts are encouraged, in my opinion. I had a chat with someone on the first Sunday night about no-code tools and whether or not that is actually a thing and if it's worthwhile or not. And obviously, part of me is a purist, and I'm like, no, we should build everything from scratch and everything. But I do think sometimes shortcuts are important. In this case, this is a client I'm working with at the moment who runs a business, a rather successful business. I would consider an entrepreneur because I also think the way that we view entrepreneurship has gotten a bit skewed. Just because you don't have VC investment doesn't mean that you're not doing interesting things, that you're creating value in the world, and that you're running a great business. So her space is all in networking. She connects people, she runs events, all this kind of stuff. And for ages, she's wanted an app. So last year, she went to an agency and I believe paid about $15,000 for a workshop. And then they quoted her $70,000 for a prototype for an app. We know what we do is expensive, right? And that's okay. I'm not truly shocked at those numbers. What I am shocked about is she was looking basically for a community app. Do we really need to build another community app from scratch, people? Probably not. Especially given that she, again, is not VC backed. This is not like a stepping stone to some massive investment to go to another level and to go to hypergrowth. No, this is just a business owner who's looking to have an app. So when we spoke about it, she was like, well, I did that thing last year and this is what happened, and I think I will just never have an app. And I thought, well, actually, there's great community platforms out there already. And we know this, right? Like Stream is here as well. So if you wanted to just put in some chat, why would we build it from scratch? Similarly with the community thing, I don't know if people are familiar with Circle. I quite like that one. I'm a bit biased there, but there are a couple of these options out there. They are VC backed. They have a great team of developers. Let them do the work and let's pay them. So what you then have, obviously, is a web thing. And you're like, well, great, now what? Well, we know now what, because we would wrap it in an app. Because you can just stick a web view in an app, add some tab buttons, and we're good to go. Turns out there are agencies that do that. So in one call, I basically said to her, that's what I would do, and it would cost us $6,000 instead of $70,000. She can sell her memberships, she can be found on the App Store, and she can run the business that she's looking to run. Now, I'm not saying this to put us out of a job, but again, it's all about context. And if we keep those really high standards in place, which we need for a time and place, absolutely, it prevents some people coming into this industry and actually doing some interesting things and creating some value. And that's hopefully the message I'm conveying with you with this story. Now, you might be sitting there anxiously wanting to tweet, but not all devs. Maxime, I wouldn't have done that. Like, we're not all horrible people. Which again, I want to say that I'm not saying those people were. I don't know the full context. I haven't spoken to them. I'm just trying to share what I know from these stories. But before we discuss, well, not all devs, how do we end up here? Why are we in this situation? And why is there this divide? And how did it come to be? Why is this happening? For that, I went back a little bit and thought, well, how did I end up in this? Because I get that question a lot. You know, I am a woman in tech, and apparently that's rare. So people from time to time will still ask me, how did you end up in all of this? And my answer is usually the same. I don't know. I was 5 years old. We got a Compaq. Sorry, no Windows yet. No Apple yet. It ran Windows 95, and I was just like, this is the best thing ever. Like, how do I get to play with this? How do I get to make it do interesting and fun things? I never thought I was going to be a developer, and well, here we are. And so I thought about that, and I was like, well, how did I do that? What stages did I go through to kind of get to that point? And there were 3 stages I could identify, which started with curiosity, which is extra easy when you're a kid, right? You're curious about things, you want to know how the world works, you stumble around, you play, you try different things, and over time, when it goes well, you become familiar. You start to develop some familiarity with whatever it is that you're doing. You start to understand, if I do this, this other thing might happen. And you start to reaffirm those thoughts. And ultimately, you end up with comfort. You're comfortable with something. What is comfort? Well, it's knowing what to expect. Not really being taken aback or surprised much. And if you are, you can usually figure out what's going on there and what happened. Because at this stage, you have a fairly good understanding of cause and effect. The opposite of that, obviously, is discomfort. And I can't tell you how many people I've seen in front of a computer, hands poised, terrified to type something or touch a keyboard or touch a mouse. I used to teach seniors how to get online when I was in high school. That was one of my side gigs. And it isn't just then, right? Because we think right now, we've got designers, we have a UX team, we do user research, we've got this, right? Things are more usable than ever, which is true, thank God. But technophobia is still very much of a real thing. It's described as abnormal fear or anxiety about the effects of advanced technology. And we just saw how much of advanced technology is happening and being generated year after year. To the result that it's affecting 1/3 of the population, to the point that they have various health problems and the inability to work efficiently. Now, I might guesstimate here and say that 1/3 might be in the slightly older range, but that shouldn't matter, right? Because we're building accessible apps, we're building products for everyone, and that includes absolutely every age, every background, and every need. And so if we still have people terrified of touching a computer, that nobody wins in that case. So this discomfort is real. Because the way it manifests, right, it has to do with expectations. And if you have no idea what will be happening, you effectively live in suspense. Think of a horror movie, right, where you are in this continuous suspense. You might be unable to relax because you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what's coming next. Now, if you're a horror buff, a bit like me, and you watch a lot of them, again, over time and with experience, you become more comfortable. Maybe you're even able to predict what ends up happening, and when the director does get you with a jump scare, you're like, well done. But overall, you're able to relax, whereas someone new to the genre might not. Another reason for failed or mismatched expectations is we might be basing beliefs on something inaccurate. Because if we believe something inaccurate, then the result probably isn't quite what we had in mind either. Like basing love on a Disney movie. I mean, I liked Aladdin growing up, and I still think it's a pretty cool movie. But if I took away from this that it's totally okay for someone I meet to pretend they're a complete different person than they actually are, probably not a great idea to base love on. And lastly as well, many people don't trust what to expect because they've been burnt in the past. Their data went missing, their dissertation decided to disappear, a floppy disk died, the computer did this or that, they got an error screen that they didn't expect, or they don't know what to expect. On top of that, how can we accurately draw conclusions between cause and effect and know what to expect? Because let's be real, sometimes we have the same inputs, but we get different outputs. Like when we're all studying at the same level for a test, and then we all get different results. Or the inverse, where we have different inputs but the same outcome, like the person who shows up 2 minutes before the test, didn't study at all and still gets a great grade, right? When we see this happening in the world all the time, how can we become comfortable? How can we then improve expectations? As we've seen, usually it's experience. It's trial and error and it's cause and effect. And so doing a DD and being like, well, what does this button do? And trying out is a great way to get on board with this. But unfortunately, first of all, you have to be comfortable learning that way. And secondly, not everyone has that luxury. Because as we just saw, entering this industry, you have to get up to speed extremely quickly. And some of these founders invest their life savings into their first version. I've seen this a couple times where they scrape together £5,000 to £10,000, they put that into an MVP, and they don't get a second chance. They don't get to experience trial and error that way. That first time has to be right enough for them to recover from. Add to that the fact that sometimes you don't know what you don't know, which is evident in some of those stories I just spoke about, right? The founders didn't know, they had to ask, tell me a bit more about your tech stack decision, or can I actually hire someone? Because to them, engineers are engineers, which I'll show you what I tell them in a little bit. Sometimes as well, they don't know how to communicate expectations. And sometimes we don't even realize we have them. So what can we do about that as we are in this industry and as we want to get more people into this industry? Because coming back to impact, my belief is that we have so much knowledge and often we only share a fraction of it. And I hope you're starting to see what I mean by that, going beyond the tutorials that we share, going beyond the GitHub libraries that we share in open source. So if we want to have that impact, we need to do a couple things. We need to figure out which pieces of knowledge are worth sharing, with whom and when, and how to best do that. A couple ways you can do that. You can obviously just ask questions, loads of questions, to try and identify the missing piece of information. This is what we do in user research when people look puzzled, and we see them just staring at the screen, not sure what to do, and we basically go, well, what are you trying to do? Can you walk me through what you're seeing here? What do you think all of that means? Because what we're trying to understand is, what is the mental model of the other person? That's ultimately what we're trying to learn. What is their worldview? What's the gap with my worldview, and how can we bridge that? And how can I communicate effectively such that it lands in their worldview well? Again, when we're thinking about user research, this is where we make adaptations to our software so it works for most people's mental models. Based on their mental model, then what are the fundamental beliefs that they have, and how do the expectations derive from that? Ways to ask that are, well, why is this important to you, in a non-condescending way? What are you hoping to achieve, and how do you think I can help? Ultimately, right, what you're doing is you're being curious about why someone is asking the questions that they're asking. Again, if you watch user research, you'll see this play out in real life, which is something I recommend for absolutely everyone. And I think it's a great skill to have. It's a great skill to see people struggle with the stuff that you've built. My very first talk in 2014 was called Users Don't Bite, and how at the time I'd integrated basically the dev team into user research, because when you see someone do something, you're like, I can fix that. I totally know what's happening. This is happening, that's happening in this state, and oh, okay, if I just fix this one line there, we're done. It's easier than a bug report. Of course, I know you're busy. I'm not saying, do this all day, every day. But if you can, join a usability research session one time. And so over time, you're going to be practicing thinking of questions that the other person might not have even thought to ask. And on top of that, you can ask yourself a couple things like, are we using the right tool for the job? Is this the right framework for what we're looking to get done? Do we want to use Swift UI or UI Kit? Secondly, as well, do we have the right person or the right skills or the right situation to actually be able to do this job and achieve the outcome that we want? Do we have the right timeline for this goal? You know, sometimes we get asked quite ridiculous things. Can you build this entire thing in absolutely no time at all? And we might be, well, you're crazy. No, I can't. But can we break it down? Can we see what is so important about this timeline? What are they looking to achieve at that point in time? Can we break it up in a meaningful way? The VFX industry does this with trailers. So when it takes them 2 years to do a movie, there is a mad rush on the few clips that you see in the trailer, which is also why the clips in the trailer never make it into the real movie, FYI. And lastly, do we have the right complexity for the goal? I think this is especially important if you're working with early stage founders, maybe less so in some of the places that you are. But if someone is trying to just get traction or trying to get to the next funding round, do we really need to have all of these animations? Maybe not. But actually, maybe another thing is really important, and you can see that issue or that error and flag that accordingly as well. Now, these are a couple questions that we can ask ourselves because ultimately they are opportunities to calibrate our actions with everyone else. So those are some pieces of the what. But then how do we do this? How do we communicate? And I come back to this principle, which is the most common denominator, everyday language. The more we can do that, the easier it is. Just like when we talked about those ideas earlier on, probably all of us have seen a giraffe, either at a zoo or on TV or something or another. We don't have to necessarily been everywhere, but we have a common understanding of this object. But as you move away from common understanding, you see more and more disparity happening. We didn't all think of the same error, I'm pretty sure. We didn't all have the same housing buying process. Some of us didn't have that at all. So everyday language is a good starting point because, unfortunately, often we explain technology with more technology. And I always love this when I'm at conferences because Navati did a talk yesterday. And she was like, oh, I love learning different things, and obviously was demonstrating Firestore. And she was like, well, what would it look like if we created an app to keep track of everything that we're learning? And everyone, I mean, naturally you're doing demos for talks, right? But I love how our instinct is to go to technology to solve other things. There must be an app for that. And so this can sometimes take a mind shift, a little bit of a mind shift in order to start using, ideally, languages and examples that we all have in common. Because what that allows us to do is build bridges between what most of us know and the unknown, right? That other bit, the unknown, some of us might know, some of us might not. But what you're creating are implicit associations with a certain concept. Like, for example, if you compare something to a car, well, clearly this other thing probably it can start, it can stop, it can maybe take you places, it can maybe shelter you. Like, suddenly we have all of these ideas about this other random object just because it was compared to a car. It builds bridges. Some of the best ways to build bridges is by using stories and metaphors to make these complex ideas accessible. I promised you one of the ones I tend to use, which is that of a musician. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people say they're looking for a full stack developer. I'm like, great. Do you have a job description? What are you building? Do you have any idea? Yeah, we're building a, I don't know, iOS platform that also needs to do this and also needs to do that and has AI in it. It's like, well, you're probably not going to find a full stack developer that can do all of that because engineers are a little bit like musicians. All musicians know music, but they don't all know the same music. They can't all play the same instruments. Maybe, obviously, there are many gifted people out there that can probably do a couple instruments, but you can't assume that a drummer is also a great pianist, is also a great singer, is also a great bass player. Add to that, what are you looking to achieve? What kind of band are you putting together? Because a vocalist for an emo rock band probably not going to be the same vocalist you want for the jazz band. So just because they have a similar skill doesn't make them both suited necessarily for the same role. Just like a mobile developer, right? Not all mobile developers do Android and iOS. Or, comparing iOS to DevOps, then we're getting very, very far apart, I think. Are there any people here that do also DevOps? I'd be very interested. There we go. See, there's always people that can do it, but they become increasingly harder to find. Now, that is just one example, and metaphors aren't perfect. I'm pretty sure you can pick holes in what I just told you. But what they do is they unlock doors for other people. We're using that common everyday language, and suddenly people start to understand more and more about this crazy world that is technology. The other method, which could be a whole talk in itself, are stories. The beauty about stories are typically that they are complete. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's a shortcut for someone who hasn't gone through that trial and error, who hasn't had the beginning and the cause and the thing that happened and the impact, and then seen that result through to the end and realized, oh, okay, if I do this, that happens. When we tell stories, suddenly we can relate and we can learn as if we have experienced those events without actually having experienced them. So I think it's a pretty fabulous shortcut when we're communicating. So both of these can strengthen someone's understanding of cause and effect, which ideally in turn makes people feel more comfortable and more creative and less on edge. Now, rather than thinking of all of this as business speak or something that other people do, right, we can start to look at what we know and draw connections between, for example, how our decisions impact budgets or timelines or other things at work. If you want to take it a step further, capture that shared understanding visually in drawings and diagrams. I do a lot of design facilitation and workshops on this, but you're in luck because Steve already did a great talk about this yesterday. So I recommend go watch that recording. Ultimately, these are simple steps, right? We can pause, and when you notice yourself slightly rolling your eyes at someone's ignorance, let's admit it, sometimes we all do that, take a minute and ask yourself, what am I missing? What can I ask to understand more about what's going on here? And then, how can I contribute information if it's required? Because I want to, in this last couple minutes, make a distinction between relevant information at the right time to the right person versus opinions after opinions after opinions, which we've also seen have less opinions might be a good thing. And we keep practicing that. We keep practicing that. Now, I will be honest, basically my entire talk got hijacked in the first 40 minutes of the conference because Justin really already said it. Be kind, be helpful, and be aware. So I promised to talk on impact, right? How can you grow your impact? And there are various ways you can do that. But in my opinion, one of the core secrets to it is being able to recognize what others need, when they need it, and then finding enough common ground to transfer these ideas. And why should we be doing that as engineers? Because, we've got all kinds of people in our organizations, CTOs, CEOs, engineering managers, and so on. Why are we the ones doing that? Because, like I said, we have so much knowledge, and often we only share a fraction of it. Because all of those other people in those other roles are worried about the things that they are worried about, and they know things that they know. And sometimes the things that we are working on bubble up and can have a real effect on the bottom line of whatever else you are a part of. And so it is our responsibility doing something we already do really well, which is connecting the dots. So if you ask me how to develop more impact and get better at making a difference, I would say make it really easy for others to tap into your brain and your knowledge. And maybe, just maybe, we might build a world where innovation is effortlessly created by the diverse people it aims to serve. Thank you very much.